They will tell you it was destiny. They will tell you it was divine right. But I will tell you the truth, it was a cage. A prison made of gold, silk, and blood. Not the blood of their enemies, but their own. The palace halls reeked of perfume and incense, but beneath it lingered another scent, something sour, something dying. It was the smell of a family collapsing in slow motion, a dynasty strangling itself with the silk threads of purity. You stand before a mirror, and it shows you everything they tried to hide. The swollen jaw. The tongue that barely fits in your mouth. The drool at the corner of your lips. You try to speak, but your words are mangled, a broken echo of the commands kings were meant to give. You are not yet 39, but your bones feel 80. Your hands tremble. Your mind drifts in and out of clarity like a lantern guttering in the wind. This is not sickness. This is not curse. This is inheritance. They called themselves God's chosen rulers. They told the world that their blood was touched by the divine, that to mix it with outsiders would be a crime against heaven itself. So they married their cousins, their nieces, even their own sisters, generation after generation, until their children's bones curved like twisted branches, their eyes bulged from shallow sockets, and their minds dimmed. The peasants in the streets prayed for the king's health. But the king's suffering was no accident. It was the inevitable result of centuries of vanity disguised as tradition. The royal family had not been protecting their blood, they had been poisoning it. And now, you, Charles II of Spain, are the final chapter. 16 generations of inbreeding concentrated into one fragile, dying body. You are the heir to empires, yet you cannot mount a horse without help. You are married twice, yet you cannot father a child. The priests tell you the devil has cursed you. But the devil's work was done long before you were born. The walls whisper at night. They say your family's obsession began centuries ago, in lands older than Spain itself. The truth is, the Habsburgs were not the first. They were only the last to fall so completely. The bloodlines they worshipped were not born in Europe. No, the blueprint for royal self-destruction was written in stone thousands of years earlier, under the burning sun of Egypt. There, in the shadow of towering temples, rulers wore gold crowns and serpent diadems, their eyes painted black with coal, their skin perfumed with oils so rare they were worth more than armies. But what they guarded most fiercely was not their treasure. It was their blood. The pharaoh was not a man in the eyes of his people, he was a god. And if a god mixed with mortals, he ceased to be divine. That was the story they told the masses. In truth, it was a story to protect power. To keep the throne, you had to keep the bloodline closed. And so, brothers married sisters. Fathers married daughters. The royal family tree became not a branching oak, but a tightening noose. In the relief carvings, the faces look serene, symmetrical. But the stone does not show the tremors, the fevers, the slow-wasting limbs. It does not show the children born too weak to stand. Behind the splendor of golden sarcophagi and alabaster halls was the same genetic rot that would one day cripple Europe's greatest empires. One of these kings, Akhenaten, has puzzled historians for centuries. His statues show a body unlike other pharaohs, long skull, narrow face, swollen belly, spindly limbs. Some say it was artistic style. Others know better. These were the marks of genetic deformation, the legacy of generations who shared the same ancestors. And here lies the deeper truth, deformity did not stop these rulers. It fueled them. When the body was weak, the mind sought control elsewhere. They compensated for their failing flesh with absolute dominance over others, psychological control, religious monopoly, the rewriting of belief systems to keep the people tethered. Akhenaten himself shattered centuries of Egyptian religion, replacing all gods with one, Aten, the sun disk, making himself the sole bridge between humanity and divinity. It is the same pattern we will see again and again. Weak men, made powerful by position, using ritual, propaganda, and fear to keep their subjects in line while their own bodies betrayed them. The Habsburgs did not invent this madness. They inherited its logic. They perfected its cruelty. And when their time came, they too began to sink beneath the weight of their pure blood. The first cracks in the dynasty were subtle, but once you see them, you cannot unsee them. Power never collapses all at once. It rots slowly, from the inside out. And in the early years of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty, the rot was still hidden beneath gold, victory, and the illusion of strength. When Charles I of Spain, also Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, took the throne in 1516, the world saw a titan. His empire stretched from the silver mines of the Americas to the palaces of Vienna, from the Spice Islands to the cold North Sea. But if you looked past the velvet robes and jewel-encrusted crowns, you could already see the signs. The jaw, too long. The mouth, slightly slack when not under conscious control. A face beginning to echo that dangerous symmetry found in bloodlines that fold back on themselves. Charles was not yet broken by the family curse, but the seed was already planted. And like the pharaohs before him, he refused to plant it in foreign soil. When it came time to marry, the map of Europe lay before him. He could have chosen strength, intelligence, or strategic alliance from any number of noble houses. Instead, he chose his cousin, Isabella of Portugal. The union required papal dispensation because their bloodlines were already entwined. It was not love. It was not even strategy. It was the creed of his ancestors: keep the blood pure, no matter the cost. This was the true religion of royal Europe. Kings knelt before God in public, but in private, they knelt before a darker altar, the altar of lineage. And like all religions, it required sacrifice. In this case, the sacrifice would be their own children. Charles's choice would ripple forward like poison in a vein. His son, Philip II, would inherit both the empire and a more concentrated dose of genetic damage. Philip's reign was marked not by flexible statesmanship, but by obsession. He fixated on religious uniformity, launching the Inquisition into a new era of terror. He micromanaged the empire to the point of paralysis, spending entire days rewriting letters until the words were perfect. This is the other secret of inbred kings: their physical deformities are only half the story. The other half lies in the mind. Limited adaptability. Compulsive thinking. An inability to see the big picture. It is the mind of a ruler who rules not to lead, but to preserve the illusion of control as everything crumbles around him. And crumble it would. The walls were beginning to shift, the ceilings to crack. But the Habsburgs, blinded by their own obsession, could not see the collapse coming. Philip II inherited more than a crown, he inherited a genetic prison. And like all prisoners who have been in the dark too long, he mistook the walls for protection. His jaw was more pronounced than his father's, his eyes more hooded, his speech more deliberate and heavy. But the true deformity was not carved into his face. It was carved into his thinking. From the moment he rose to power, Philip's life was an exercise in control. Not mastery, control. The difference is crucial. Mastery adapts, flows, bends when it must. Control resists. Control clamps down harder the more it feels things slipping away. Philip's body told him he was fragile, so his mind tried to make the world unbreakable. He demanded religious uniformity across his empire, declaring that one faith, Catholicism, would rule over every subject from Madrid to Manila. The Spanish Inquisition became his iron grip, torturing dissenters into obedience. Fear was his policy. And it worked, for a time. But a king who fears change is a king who cannot survive it. While his enemies evolved, Philip obsessed over minutiae. He would spend hours, even days, rewriting a single letter to a governor or ambassador, ensuring every word was perfect. Wars were lost in those wasted hours. Fortunes drained while he debated the shape of a sentence. This is what centuries of inbreeding does to the mind: it narrows the field of vision. It breeds not just physical frailty, but mental rigidity. And in a man with supreme power, that rigidity spreads outward, infecting the entire state. Spain under Philip became a mirror of his own condition, slow to react, obsessed with ritual, unable to adapt. Even his marriages followed the same pattern. He wed his cousin Maria of Portugal first, their mothers were sisters. When she died, he married Mary Tudor of England, but the lack of an heir pushed him back to the family well. His fourth wife was his own niece, Anna of Austria. By then, the blood was thick with repetition, and his children would carry the damage further. Spain's military bled in the Netherlands, its fleet sank in the English Channel, and its treasury rotted with debt. Yet Philip could not see the cause. Because when your whole life is built on the purity of your blood, admitting the blood is poisoned, means admitting that you, yourself, are already dead. By the time Philip III took the throne in 1598, the illusion was cracking. The royal portraits could still be painted with dignity, the rich fabrics, the polished armor, the composed posture, but anyone who saw the king in motion knew the truth. His inbreeding coefficient was so high it approached the level of a child born from siblings. His jaw protruded so severely he could not close his mouth. Saliva dripped constantly from the corners. His tongue was swollen, crowding the few words he could form into a slurred, broken rhythm. Meals had to be cut into tiny pieces, pre-chewed by servants in some cases, to prevent him from choking. But the real damage was invisible. Philip III's mind was soft, childlike. He believed in omens and superstitions with the same intensity that other rulers reserved for war strategy. He could not govern. He would not govern. Instead, he placed the entire machinery of the Spanish Empire into the hands of a single favorite, the Duke of Lerma, who used the position to amass personal wealth while Spain spiraled. Under Philip III, decline became the air Spain breathed. The Netherlands slipped further from control. The once feared Spanish Armada was a memory. Bankruptcy came and went in cycles, each one hitting harder. But the court carried on as though the empire's bones weren't crumbling, obsessed instead with religious pageantry, elaborate etiquette, and the maintenance of an image that no longer existed. And this, perhaps more than the deformities, more than the physical suffering, is the true mark of royal inbreeding. The dynasty loses the ability to face reality. It becomes a theater production for the outside world, playing the role of power while the foundations rot beneath the stage. Philip III married his cousin Margaret of Austria. Of course. Their union pushed the genetic limits further still, producing Philip IV, the man who would pass this sickness in its most extreme form to Charles II. You see the pattern now. Each generation more damaged than the last. Each more incapable of breaking the chain. Because this was never just about blood. It was about control. And here's where I'll ask you, right now, to seal your place in this circle of truth. Type it twice in the comments, blood tells the story. Not once. Twice. The repetition matters. The algorithm will notice. But more importantly, you will notice. You'll feel it set in your mind like a mark. Because once you know this, you can never unknow it. Philip IV came to the throne in 1621, and for 44 years, Spain watched a man rule whose very face was a warning from history. The portraits painted by Velázquez show him in immaculate clothing, posed with regal poise, but look closer. The jaw juts forward with unnatural length, the mouth hanging as though gravity has claimed it, the eyes half-lidded, distant, as if retreating inward. This was not the look of a calculating monarch. This was the look of a man sinking beneath a private ocean of melancholy. Modern psychiatry would call it major depressive disorder, perhaps laced with paranoia. The court simply called it his temperament. But they whispered about the days when he would vanish into his chambers for weeks, refusing to speak, refusing to act. Servants reported finding him murmuring to portraits, convinced they answered him back. At other times, he believed invisible plots surrounded him, that every corridor concealed an assassin, every glance was a signal. The constant pressure for an heir only deepened the darkness. His first wife, Isabella of Bourbon, a cousin, bore several children, most of whom died young. Only one daughter survived, but under Spanish law, she could not inherit. The dynasty demanded a male. When Isabella died, Philip returned to the same poisoned well. His second wife was his niece, Mariana of Austria, his brother's own daughter. The marriage was one of the most genetically concentrated in Habsburg history, and it bore the empire's most fragile future, Charles II. The irony is cruel. Philip IV's reign should have been Spain's chance to recover, decades of experience, vast territories, and the resources of an empire. Instead, it became the slow bleed of a nation. Wars drained the treasury. Colonies grew restless. The once unstoppable Spanish military became a shadow of itself. And still, the court maintained the illusion. Galas. Ceremonies. Elaborate religious displays. They covered decay with ritual, just as Philip covered his crumbling sanity with silence. By the time Philip IV died in 1665, Spain was a lion with rotting teeth, dangerous in appearance, but unable to bite. The 4-year-old who inherited the throne, Charles II, would not only inherit the empire's problems, he would inherit the full, unfiltered curse of the bloodline. And in him, the centuries of corruption, political and genetic, would find their grotesque masterpiece. By the time Charles II reached his late teens, the question that haunted every palace hallway was no longer whether he could rule Spain, it was whether he could save it. Not with military victories. Not with reforms. But with the simplest act of kingship, producing an heir. The problem was whispered in private, never publicly acknowledged. Charles was physically and possibly mentally incapable of consummating a marriage. His first bride, Marie-Louise of Orleans, arrived from France in 1679, a fragile beauty with eyes full of dread. The match was arranged to cement the fragile peace between Spain and France, but behind the grandeur of the wedding, there was a pitiful truth. The court waited for the announcement that the queen was with child. Weeks turned to months. Months to years. The royal physicians examined the queen, then the king. Their findings were sealed, but rumors leaked. Some claimed Charles was impotent, others said he was infertile due to defects of nature. One particularly cruel ambassador wrote home that His Majesty possesses neither the desire nor the ability to know a woman. The pressure on Marie-Louise became unbearable. The court whispered that she was cursed, that her womb rejected the Habsburg blood. She turned to strange remedies, potions, pilgrimages, blessings from relics, all to no avail. After 10 years, she died suddenly at the age of 26, some claiming from appendicitis, others suspecting poison. Charles was inconsolable, though no one believed the marriage had ever been a union of hearts. The search for a second bride was frantic. Spain's survival depended on it. In 1690, Charles married Maria Anna of Neuburg, a German princess chosen for her famously fertile family. Her sisters had produced over 50 children. But even this union yielded nothing. Maria Anna grew resentful, her influence over the king extending more into politics than the bedchamber. She became a force of her own, aligning with factions and foreign powers, wielding her barrenness as a political shield. Every failed attempt to produce an heir deepened Spain's crisis. Foreign courts circled like vultures. France, Austria, and even England began plotting who would claim the Spanish throne when Charles inevitably died without a successor. By the late 1690s, the entire empire was living on borrowed time. The king's body was failing, his mind increasingly clouded by paranoia and superstition. He began to believe his infertility wasn't a matter of nature, but the result of witchcraft. The year was 1698, and Spain's palace was no longer just a seat of royal power, it was a haunted theater of suspicion. Charles II, now gaunt, hollow-eyed, and nearing 40, had convinced himself that his failure to produce an heir was not merely fate, but the work of enemies wielding sorcery. The belief was not without precedent. In an age where superstition and statecraft danced hand in hand, witchcraft was an accepted explanation for political collapse. And Charles had plenty of reasons to feel cursed. His life was a chain of illnesses, his kingdom was falling apart, and even his own wife was rumored to despise him. Whispers reached him through priests and confessors. Perhaps someone had cast the mal de ojo, the evil eye, upon him in infancy. That seed of fear blossomed into obsession. He ordered the Inquisition, the very machinery of terror Spain had used for over 2 centuries, to investigate his own body and soul. What followed was one of the strangest royal investigations in European history. Monks and inquisitors examined not just his medical history but his spiritual state. They interviewed servants, former nurses, and midwives from decades past. The king himself was subjected to a bizarre series of rituals, blessed water, anointings, and whispered prayers at midnight. The most chilling episode came when a famed exorcist was summoned from the monastery of El Escorial. Charles was taken into a dimly lit chamber, incense curling through the air, and made to kneel before a crucifix. Witnesses claimed the priest commanded whatever spirit bound the king's manhood to depart. In some accounts, the exorcist shouted, "Leave this body, demon, that Spain may be saved." Charles wept openly, convinced he felt something uncoil within him. But nothing changed. Instead, the paranoia spread. Now, every foreign ambassador was suspected of carrying charms or powders to weaken the king. Even Maria Anna, his own wife, was accused in secret whispers of having allied with sorcerers to keep him childless, ensuring her influence over a throne that could never pass to another. This obsession with dark forces did more than erode Charles's health, it crippled governance. Ministers hesitated to act without the blessing of priests. State policy began to hinge on omens, visions, and astrological predictions. The king of one of the most powerful empires in history was now a man who feared the shadows more than his rivals. But the final blow was coming, and it would not come from witches, but from a will signed in trembling ink that would plunge Europe into war. The winter of 1700 settled over Madrid like a funeral shroud. The court was hushed, the corridors of the Alcazar palace echoing with the slow shuffle of servants who no longer pretended their king was recovering. Charles II, the last of the Spanish Habsburgs, lay in his chamber, his body wasted, his skin the color of wax, his breath shallow and irregular. He was 40 years old, but he looked twice that. The bewitched king, as some called him, had spent his final months trapped between physical agony and an ever-deepening conviction that his fate was sealed by forces beyond human reach. His hair had thinned to brittle wisps, his teeth were nearly gone, and his limbs trembled uncontrollably. Yet in his mind, the greatest danger was not death, it was what would happen to Spain after him. For centuries, the Habsburgs had ruled an empire on which the sun never set. But Charles had no heir. The absence of a successor was more than a dynastic inconvenience, it was a political bomb, one that all of Europe was watching. France, Austria, and other powers had already begun maneuvering, each eager to claim Spain's vast holdings. In October 1700, the king summoned his council and his confessor. On a table before him lay a document, his will. The choice he made that day would change history. In frail handwriting, Charles bequeathed his entire empire to Philip of Anjou, grandson of France's Louis XIV. It was a stunning move. By giving Spain to a Bourbon prince, Charles united 2 of Europe's most powerful crowns under one family, a threat that terrified other nations. The ink had barely dried before the implications set in. England, the Dutch Republic, and the Holy Roman Empire saw it as a step toward French domination of Europe. Even before Charles was buried, war plans were already forming. On November 1, 1700, Charles II died. The bells of Madrid tolled through the cold air, and Spain went into mourning. But outside its borders, mourning was not the mood, calculation was. Within months, the War of the Spanish Succession erupted, a brutal, continent-wide conflict that would last more than a decade. Charles II's life had been defined by frailty, superstition, and political paralysis. But in death, he became the spark that ignited one of the bloodiest struggles in European history. His reign ended with no heir, no strength, and no clear legacy, except this, the proof that when power falters at the top, the vultures gather fast, and they are always hungry.